Hey, hi. Thank you. So I'm going to hand this over to Kevin. Kevin is the president of HACED, which is our employee resource group for the city of Dallas. So
Yes,
Kevin.
good morning or good afternoon. Right on the border, right? Um, my name is Kevin Acosta. I am the president of the Hispanic Association of City Employees for Results, otherwise known as ACER. And I am also the partnership liaison with the Department of Equity and Inclusion, Equity Division. And I have been a part of the city now going on 21 years and enjoying every moment of it as a civil servant. And I have the honor to uh, introduce our two panelists today, Carla Petzia. She's an associate professor of human and social sciences with the University of Dallas, specializing in medical and cultural anthropology. Dr. Petia is a Peruvian American, originally from Houston, and she has lived and worked in Peru and Guatemala. Her research focuses on health, illness, and well-being among U.S. Latinx and as well as the Latin American communities that we have in Dallas and around the States. In her free time, she dances Argentine tango, ooh, nice, and plays soccer. And we'll just have to ask later what position she plays. By the way, let's also introduce Mark Peterson, who is an associate professor of history and the director of the Latin American Studies concentration here at the University of Dallas. Thank you for being with us, both of you. More about Dr. Peterson, and he's a native of Florida. He has lived in a variety of countries, including Chile and Argentina. His teaching and research focuses on the history of the Americas and the inter-American relations. In his free time, he likes to cook. Oh, we'll have to get together, especially Latin American food, of course, and play music and visit libraries. So we'll have to do an offside talk about arepas con huevo. All righty, we'll get back into the program. Jessica, take it away.
All right, so here we are, and thank you so much for introducing our two guests today. I'm going to spotlight Mark and then have him take over.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you very much for that introduction. It is such a pleasure to be here. We are very honored to be asked to participate in this session. Both Carla and I are really excited to be here and to hear about all the wonderful things that the Dallas Public Library and ACER are doing, especially that I just found out about the cooking show series that's been going on. And as a chef myself, I'm really interested to see what y'all have been doing and the recipes that you've been making. So again, it's just such a pleasure to be here. We are here to present on the independence celebrations that many Latin American countries celebrate this month, really September last month, but some of them also spill over into October. And so that is the overall theme of our presentation. I'm going to share my screen with you since we have a PowerPoint. Can everyone see that?
Yes. Looks good.
Okay, great. All right, as Jessica said, we'll have most of the questions at the end. So if there's anything about our presentation that raises a question, or you have something that you want to know more about, or you want to share your own experience of celebrating Independence Days in Latin America, then we very much welcome those. Feel free to save those to the end, or as Jessica said, you can type them into the chat and she can pose them to us. If there's anything really pressing, you can also send us questions while we present, and we can pause and explain something if there's something not very clear. So we hope that this will be a conversation and participatory, and we look forward to hearing from you what you are interested in and would like to know. So don't be shy in sending those over. Right, so the title of this presentation is September, A History of Independence Days Around Latin America. Now, when we think about September as a month to celebrate Latin American independence, for most people, the first thing that comes to mind is celebrating Mexican independence. Viva Mexico! On the 16th of September, Mexico marks its Independence Day. Actually, as we'll discuss later, celebrations begin a little bit earlier, usually on the 15th, on the night of the 15th, the eve of the 16th. And so that is often the one that most people have in mind, or that most people, especially in the United States, have experienced. And in this area, that is really the main Independence Day celebration. In fact, the independence of Mexico has been celebrated here in Dallas for generations, going all the way back to the beginning of the 20th century, when Mexicans started coming to the United States, and Mexican American communities started growing rapidly in this part of Texas. Of course, there have been people who trace their history back to Texas in this region for generations, if not centuries, but in this particular area, it goes back to the beginning of the 20th century, more or less. And we have actually some wonderful images and stories about the celebrations here in Dallas over the ages. And so I'll just share with you a few of those. This image comes from a celebration of Mexican independence from 1928. So this is a group of people celebrating in Pikes Park, which was once part of the one of the large Mexican American neighborhoods, Little Mexico, here in Dallas. The celebrations here evolved over time from what you can see there to bigger celebrations like in the 1960s. This photo comes from a celebration, a parade in the 1960s, and then all the way up to today. And there you have a celebration of independence at the Mexican consulate in Dallas. They're recreating the grito, which we'll tell you a little bit about in just a little bit. So in many ways, this is the experience of celebrating independence that most people in this area know of and are familiar with. However, as you hopefully are aware of, and if you're not aware, I'm very excited to draw your attention to this, there are actually many different celebrations of independence that take place in the month of September. This is really a month of celebration for Latin America and Latino, Latinx communities here in the United States. And on the screen there is a quick calendar breakdown of when various parts of the region celebrate its independence and when various communities from these places will celebrate their independence. So early in the month, on the 7th, Brazil celebrates its independence. Then on the 15th, Central American countries, including Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica celebrate. The next day is Mexican Independence Day. Then a few days later, Chile celebrates its independence. And a few days after that, a country that is sometimes included in Latin America, but sometimes not, Belize celebrates its independence, which occurred much later than the others in the 1980s. This presentation, by the way, we're going to focus on Brazil, Central America, Mexico, and Chile. Not to say that Belize is not worth consideration. We're happy to talk a little bit about that if you're interested, but we're going to focus on these countries since those are the ones that you'll encounter most in this area. Now, I will say also that although many Latin American countries celebrate their independence in September, that is not the only month of celebration. In fact, I've provided you here a quick table breakdown of the various celebrations throughout the year. And it's kind of interesting that there's a concentration of celebration during the summer. So you have July and August. A lot of countries will celebrate their Independence Days then. But you have celebrations starting at the very beginning of the year with Haiti, all the way to the end of the year in November with Panama. So lots of celebrations throughout the year. As you can tell, our focus today is on September, in part because that is one of the reasons why we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month during this time of the year, is because of the celebrations that take place. To start off this presentation, I'll give you a quick rundown of of where Latin American independence comes from. I'm a historian, that's my bread and butter. So I know a lot about how Latin American societies became independent. So that's what I'll provide to you. I'll give you a quick rundown of how they became independent and why it is certain societies celebrate on specific days. And then after I finish that, I'll turn it over to Carla, to Dr. Petsia, who will tell you a little bit about how these celebrations take place in today. So really quick historical overview, and this is going to be a very, very quick run through of the history. And so I'm generalizing a lot, and always happy though to get into the details if you have more interest in it. So feel free to pose questions. So just an overview here, as you can see on the screen, starting in 1791 with Haiti, war and revolution erupted throughout the French, Spanish, and Portuguese empires in the Americas. The first Latin American country to gain independence was Haiti, or Haiti, in 1804. That was actually the most successful slave insurrection in world history. And so it's quite remarkable for that, and also for it achieving independence. It's the second independent republic in the Americas after the United States. Then within a few years, a variety of other Spanish American societies began their struggles for independence, gaining their independence by 1825. Brazil also had a brief struggle for independence between 1822 and 1825, and that was achieved in 1825. The final colony to gain independence from Spain was Cuba in 1889, with the Spanish-American Cuban-Filipino War in that year. One thing to note is that Puerto Rico, which was part of the Spanish Empire, did not become independent. It was acquired by the United States in 1898, and it remains a territory of the United States. So that's just an interesting historical development. Again, I'm happy to talk to you more about that, but the focus today is going to be on independence in a range of countries that I've discussed already. So that's the overview. How and why did they gain their independence in this moment? Well, first of all, to understand it, you need to have a sense of the geography of where we're talking about. So just to give you a quick introduction, you can see on the screen here that the Spanish Empire, so those territories controlled by Spain before independence, stretched from the Great Salt Lake up in Utah, all the way down to Tierra del Fuego down in the far south of South America. So on the screen there, it's the area that is shaded in light blue. The light blue actually stops at the border between the United States and Mexico. If it was a really accurate map, it would extend all the way north into Utah. The Portuguese Empire, by contrast, was in today Brazil, and you can see that shaded in the dark blue on your map. So when we're talking about Spanish America and Portuguese America, those are the areas that we are discussing. Those are the geographies that we're talking about. So independence really dates back to the 18th century and to a set of reforms and changes that occurred within the Spanish and Portuguese Empire during that century. Both of these empires were effectively trying to make their empires more profitable, their holdings in the Americas more profitable. And so the crowns of Spain and Portugal introduced a variety of reforms during the 18th century that started to change the relationship between their colonies and in the Americas and the center of the empire, Spain and Portugal. And these changes led to a lot of resentments amongst people within the empire who felt like the rules of the game were changing, and they didn't have much of a say in how things were changing. That's not to say that everybody resented these in the empire. This is a very diverse area that we're talking about. But there did emerge in the empire a group who started questioning their relationship to Spain and to Portugal. And they started thinking perhaps it would be better to change that relationship ourselves by getting more autonomy from Spain and Portugal. In addition to that, many indigenous peoples, and we have to remember that the majority of the population in most of Spanish America was indigenous populations also started to question their relationship to the empire. And this led to several major rebellions at the end of the 18th century, including a major rebellion in Peru known as the Tupac Amaru Rebellion in the 1780s. So we see already in the 18th century some questioning over this imperial structure. Now that questioning really accelerated in the 1790s and the 1810s because of the broader context of Atlantic revolutions. We have, for example, the United States becoming independent in the 1770s. France erupts in revolution in 1789. And this leads to chaos across the Atlantic that encourages various groups to consider the possibility of starting their own revolution. In Spain, the Napoleonic Wars actually led to an invasion from France into Spain and an occupation of Spain and Portugal. That led to a crisis within the empire over how the empire should be governed. Folks in the Americas who were governed by Spain didn't recognize the new king that France had put on the throne. And so in this moment, they decided to start forming their own governments, which they called juntas. And it's this experience from 1808 to 1810 that's really the beginning of independence in Latin America. Within a few years, these bodies, these juntas, eventually decide, you know what? This system isn't working for us. Let's just go ahead and break off entirely and declare our independence. And between 1810 and 1825, there are efforts throughout Spanish America and Portuguese America to break off from their empires and gain their independence. Most of them succeed in this by the 1820s. So there you have a very quick overview of the timeline and how it all played out. And now let me give you a quick introduction to when several countries celebrate their independence in September and why. So Mexico, as I mentioned, celebrates its independence in September I just realized that was a typo, on September 16th, 1810. Apologies for that typo. And they celebrate it on that day because of an event known as the Grito de Dolores. The Grito de Dolores was a call by a priest named Father Miguel Hidalgo to his parishioners and to New Spain, which becomes Mexico in general, to throw off the yoke of Spanish imperialism and seize freedom and create an independent state. Now, this was only the beginning of a very long process towards independence. In fact, it would take Mexico almost 11 years to achieve its independence, finally achieving it in 1821. But most of those movements kind of trace their history back to that day, September 16th, 1810, when Hidalgo called for independence. In Chile, they celebrate their independence on September 18th, in part because of an event that also happened in 1810. So we have these events separated just by two days in two different ends of the Spanish-American Empire. On September 18th, a governing body, the junta, was formed in Santiago de Chile, and this was, again, the beginning of the independence process. It would take Chile several years, the better part of a decade, to achieve their independence. Independence was achieved in 1818, and the last Spanish troops in the territory that is now Chile left in 1826. So this was quite a long and drawn-out process. So they celebrate, just like in Mexico, they celebrate the beginning of the independence process on their Independence Day. In Central America, it's somewhat different. They celebrate independence on September 15th, because of a Congress that occurred in 1821. In that Congress, on September 15th, the delegates of the various Central American countries declared their independence from Spain. This again was part of a process. In fact, we could trace their independence process back to 1810 or 1811. This, though, is their declaration of independence, and they achieved that independence then 2 years later in 1823. It's a more complicated history. They were absorbed into Mexico briefly and then became independent as one unit and eventually broke up into the various countries that we today know in Central America. And then finally, Brazil. Brazil celebrates its independence on September 7th, because of an event in 1822. And that, just like in Central America, was a declaration of independence. In that case, the Portuguese prince, who was at that time living in Brazil, joined with a variety of Brazilian elites to declare Brazil's independence from Portugal. And they established a Brazilian empire. So they were not a republic like the rest of the Americas. This began a process of independence again that was achieved in 1825. So there you go. That's a quick rundown of why these various countries celebrate their independence days on these particular dates. Almost from the beginning, by the way, as these new countries emerged and the new governments got going, they recognized the importance of marking the day that this new nation came to be. And across the board in the early part of the 19th century, all of these countries established traditions and holidays to celebrate and mark this monumental experience of achieving independence. And so that's the beginning of these celebrations. I'm going to now turn it over to Carla to tell you a little bit about what it's like to celebrate these dates today.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for being here and for inviting us to talk. As Mark said, we're really excited to be here. I'm going to just talk kind of briefly about celebrations today. And the ways in which people, or I guess different countries do things just slightly differently. And Mark's going to be, are you moving my slides forward? Okay, excellent. So next slide, please. So in general, I want to say that much of the activities or much of the celebrations are kind of what you might expect. There's a lot of parallels to, say, the 4th of July and how things are celebrated here. But as I mentioned, each country has their particulars. So I'll go through the countries that Mark went through. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about food, just because I always feel the need to talk about food on occasion. So generally, you're going to see parades, and they're going to be oftentimes military parades or more local civic parades. The military parades are often big. They're kind of part of a separate celebration that falls with the national holiday or the Independence Day as a kind of a special armed forces day celebration that tends to be the day after the Independence Day specifically. You'll see family gatherings, you see neighborhood gatherings. Some of these get really, really big depending on what country you might be in, if you're in the city or if you're in a more rural area. There's always going to be traditional foods and traditional dances. Almost every celebration has fireworks. And you'll often hear the singing of the national anthem, particularly in the cities. You'll see that often with the military band. I will add that while you see these really big celebrations in the capitals and then throughout the countries, each respective country, you do see a lot of celebrations across the globe. As Mark was talking about, you see celebrations here in Dallas. Houston has a week-long celebration. New York, all sorts of places. Like when I was doing a little bit of research for some of the countries I wasn't as familiar with, and I typed in, Mexican Independence Day celebration, like at least in my Google search, like the first 20 hits were for places outside of Mexico and just across the globe. And the same was true for some of the other places. So you do see a lot of celebration because of just migration patterns and interest in wanting to preserve our heritage and connections with our home countries. Next slide. So I'm going to start with Mexico, and one of the really interesting things, what I'm going to do with these, with each of these specific countries, is really highlight some of the more unique features to their celebrations. So with Mexico, what's interesting is that they do a reenactment of El Grito, right? The president will be at the National Palace. They ring, it's supposed to be the same bell as what Father Hidalgo rang, and then he gives a speech that is sort of paraphrases what Father Hidalgo says. Apparently, we don't know exactly what was said, but the idea is there. Something that is really kind of moving and powerful, that connects us to the nation and reminds us of our history and the strength that that Mexico has as a nation. Again, the singing of the national anthem is usually done right afterwards. And then the kind of typical traditional foods that are eaten specifically for Independence Day would be something like pozole. And then chile en nogada is like a stuffed poblano pepper. And that's a really, most countries have the traditional foods in general that they eat, but this chile en nogada is really specific to Independence Day, as well as various snacks and sweets. I'll say I was really excited to hear about the cooking as well, not because I'm a great cook, but I love to eat. So I'm hopeful that I can try some so that someone might make one day. Anyways, the next slide, please. And now thinking about Chile, I know Dr. Peterson's going to talk a little bit more about perhaps like modern day celebrations in Chile, having been there through one. There are big, lavish neighborhood fondas, parties, right? At this point, I did notice that they're still limited due to the pandemic. Last year, they were essentially non-existent. So kind of keeping in mind that these celebrations have been adjusted just slightly due to pandemic situations. Some places have reverted back almost full 100%. Other places are still kind of having to deal with the pandemic. Chile's been wonderful in terms of a great vaccination program and putting in some restrictions. So again, for the Independence Day celebration, these fondas, these neighborhood parties that usually bring in thousands of people, they've limited to about 300 people in person. Obviously, you still get together with families, and that's what they've been promoting because then it's sort of safer, right, in terms of virus spread. There's also a lot, but a lot of the countries have kind of traditional dances. The cueca competitions, cueca being the Chilean national dance. It's a courtship dance that reenacts the sort of courting rituals between roosters and hens. And now it's dance between humans, right? But it's a really fun and beautiful dance that there'll be competitions for on Independence Day. September is also the marking of spring for a lot of the kind of more Southern American countries. So you'll see something like kite flying and like just people selling a lot of kites and people flying kites. And then their traditional foods that'll be eaten are things like the empanadas, the anticuchos, the choripan, and various other typical foods. For Central America, I focus a little bit more on Guatemala just because I lived there for some time, and so I'm really familiar with some of the customs and the ways that things were celebrated, and it's a lot of fun. Right? All these are big party celebration types. There's a lot of school marching bands in the city. You'll see kind of bigger parades, but in the rural areas, which is where I live, you see school marching bands in competition with each other. You also see a lot of marimba playing, both say kind of local marimba groups, but the children as well will be playing marimba and dancing traditional dances. One of the common traditional dances that you'll see here, not a national dance in the same way that the cueca is a national dance for Chile, but these traditional dances reenact the conquest between Spain and the indigenous people, in particular, the Maya that live in Guatemala. And so you have these very lavish costumes with masks to portray the Spaniards versus the indigenous people. They also have an independence torch run. This goes from Guatemala to Costa Rica, as Dr. Peterson was mentioning, that there was that kind of like the delegate group. Part of it was kind of the way that independence got announced to the rest of the area was this idea that there was a torch that was passed on from town to town. And so every year now there is basically like a relay race where they continue to pass the torch from Guatemala City all the way to Costa Rica. Common foods or the traditional foods are usually chuchitos or pepián. Chuchitos are like a kind of almost like a tamale, but it's slightly different, like thicker, bigger than what I usually think of as a tamale, like when I think about the Peruvian tamales or even the Mexican tamales. And then pepián, usually made with chicken or other meats. This is stew sort of food. I include here protests. It's a little, pardon my dry kind of tongue-in-cheek humor as a celebration of Independence Day, but unfortunately there are oftentimes protests, and Independence Day becomes a really important way to highlight some of the strike that might be continuing today. So this past September, last month, in Guatemala specifically, there was a protest on Independence Day to protest the corruption of the government, or what people perceive to be the corruption in the government, and highlighting a lot of the issues among indigenous people, saying that, even after 200 years, there's still rampant poverty, there's still extreme problems that need to be addressed and that aren't being addressed. So they're really trying to spotlight those issues. Similarly, I think it was, I can't remember if it was 2015 or 2016, Costa Rica also had a protest on Independence Day where the torch, the independence torch, when it got to Costa Rica, actually had to be airlifted in to the capital to kind of finish out its kind of the tradition, the ritual, because people or the administration at the time was too afraid that something might happen to individuals as they were going through the runners as they were going through the protests. So so it is kind of common in some ways at times for protests to happen on Independence Day. Next. Brazil, kind of the big thing about Brazil are the military and the civic parades. There's also an air show usually, or I guess multiple air shows, lots of samba dancing. And I can never say, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna be able to say it, but one of their traditional foods, sort of a bean stew, oftentimes made with some meat, and you have the rice, and very delicious. If I don't know how to say it, my apologies. Next slide. And as I mentioned, I was going to talk about Peru just slightly in their celebration. Their celebration is in July, when they mark their Independence Day, July 28th and 29th, 28th being the actual Independence Day, 29th, as I mentioned, many countries have the next day where it's more like an Armed Forces Day, but it's wrapped up within the Independence Day celebration. The 27th, much like in Mexico, where they start the night of the 15th, Peru, they start the night of the 27th with musical festivals. You'll also see bullfighting, horse expositions. The Peruvian horses are considered a kind of cultural heritage, kind of preserved cultural heritage because of a very particular gait that they have. And so they get highlighted on Independence Day, particularly up in northern Peru. There's a 21 cannon salute the morning of July 28th, followed by the presidential address to the nation. And on election years, that will also be the day that the president is sworn in. Following that, there's a mass led by the Archbishop of Lima. And then on the 29th, they have their grand military parade. It's pretty big. They're also known for their gastronomic fairs. Peru has made a name for itself in kind of the gastronomic tourism. So there's always big fairs, big festivals to get food, things like anticuchos, like in Chile, papas rellenas, ceviche, picarones, a whole variety of just wonderful, wonderful foods. Lots of fun, lots of again, deliciousness, and some really interesting history there. And I know Mark, I want to hand it over back to Mark so he can talk a little bit about his experiences in Chile and celebrations.
Yeah, so Dr. Petsia Carla very nicely summed up what the overall experience is like in Chile. I'll reiterate that there is a strong focus on neighborhood celebrations. Neighborhoods will organize these big parties, and some of the neighborhoods, especially in the outskirts of Santiago, where they have access to large bits of public land like parks, will put on huge events that are almost like county fairs. Not like the state fair perhaps here in Texas. It's not that big, but it's still a pretty big celebration. And they'll always have the rodeo, which is their version of the rodeo. The rodeo, by the way, is kind of interesting. You can trace the rodeo throughout Latin America into the United States. They're all kind of stemming from the same cultural experience, and they have similar roots. And so the rodeo in Chile is interesting. It's in this half moon arena, so they call it the media luna, and the idea is that you're trying to push a cow towards a certain point. So they're literally running their horses sideways and then into the cow to push them into a particular area. So that's always a big draw for people celebrating independence, is to go and watch the rodeo. The foods that Carla mentioned are really popular and ubiquitous. There are also several drinks that Chileans will enjoy. Chile, of course, is known for its wines, so there's always a lot of wine involved in the celebration of independence. They also have some other drinks that are specific to Chile. There's one drink known as the terremoto. Terremoto, if you know Spanish, means earthquake. Chile is very prone to earthquakes. It's on the Ring of Fire in the Pacific. So they get tremors quite regularly, and they created this drink, which is a type of white wine that is mixed with ice cream, usually pineapple flavored ice cream. And the idea is if you drink enough of these terremotos, you will be shaking as if you were going through an earthquake, or at least your legs will be shaky. So there's usually some partying going on into the early mornings on the nights of independence. It is, again, just a very neighborhood and family affair. A lot of families will have barbecues or asados in their homes, or in public parks. That's really popular, to go to a public park and have an asado with your friends. So it's just a lot of fun. I'm glad that Carla, you mentioned the following day there is a celebration of the armed forces, and that's also a big day of parades and things like that. Usually Chile will have 3 days off for its independence. So they're called the Fiestas Patrias, and the government is usually good enough that if the 2 days of celebration, official holiday, the Independence Day and the National Arms Day, if that falls on if Independence Day is on a Tuesday, so you would have Tuesday and Wednesday off for those official holidays, the government usually makes Monday what they call a bridge holiday, so that you have a long weekend basically, and you don't have to celebrate in the middle of the week. So yeah, it's those are some of my experiences celebrating independence in Chile. I'd be very happy to talk more about that if there's interest. And I think that, yeah, that brings us to the end of what we prepared to discuss. So I'll wrap this up by saying thank you so much again for inviting us to be here. We are very, very eager to hear any of the questions or comments that you have, perhaps an experience that you had as well celebrating independence of any of these countries or others that you have celebrated. I'll just say one final thing before I turn the floor over, and that is that here at UD we have a Latin American Studies program, and we put on regular events throughout the academic year related to Latin America. So just as you were kind enough to invite us to come to you, we would be very pleased to invite you to come to us. So please do find us on Facebook or follow our blog and join us at one of our events in the near future.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. So right now I want to go ahead and open this up if anyone has any questions for our two presenters today. And you can go ahead and put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask, but please feel free to do so at the moment, or share any fun anecdotes, as they said, from experiences you've had with some of the Independence Days. If you celebrated anything, what did you do? What did you eat? How was it?
Well, thank you, Jonathan. It's definitely a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm going to put some things in the chat, a link to our cooking series that is going to be tomorrow. This will be our third one, but you can find the recipes for the other two parts of the series previously on our events page, and you can download the recipes. They're also recorded, so if you would like the recording, feel free to go ahead and email us at libraryprograms@dallascityhall.com. And then
So I saw a question in the chat about Belize, and I'm happy to say just a little bit about that. So Belize became independent by a very different process. So whereas the Spanish and Portuguese American countries went to war to achieve their independence from Spain and Portugal, Belize gained its independence from Britain. So it was a British colony, excuse me, known as British Honduras. And it gained its independence much, much later in 1981 through a process of negotiation rather than war. So the process actually began in the 1960s as Britain was redefining its empire effectively in its relationship to its colonies. It started giving more autonomy to its colonies, including to British Honduras. And this was in many ways a response from pressure from those societies to have more autonomy and more say over their own countries. And so this began the process then in the 1960s of negotiations leading to an agreement between Britain and Belize to recognize Belizean independence in the early 1980s. Now, it was a bit complicated by the fact that Guatemala, for decades, centuries actually, had claimed Belize as part of its territory. And so Guatemala didn't necessarily want to recognize Belize until certain disputes had been resolved. So that did delay the process a little bit. In 1981, an agreement was signed between the British government and Belize and Guatemala to recognize Belizean independence. They celebrate their independence in some ways similar to the ones that we've talked about today, with parades and general celebrations and a national holiday. So you do see some similarities there with the rest of Latin America. So I'm glad that you asked. The main language of Belize is Creole, actually. So Creole is a term that we often use to describe languages that have come from a mixture of other linguistic traditions. It's a mixture of English, Indigenous, and Spanish. Those are the main influences on Belizean Creole. Besides Creole, Spanish and English are the main languages spoken there. And then there are a variety of Indigenous languages there as well, especially different types of Maya.
Really cool. Thank you, Mark. Okay, I'm going to add something else in the chat just from a previous program, I guess some more like plugging in library stuff, but we did a program on the Latinx community migration into Dallas and DFW, and so that is recorded, so if anyone wants to see that, I will put that information in the chat as well. If there's any more questions, we've got 15 minutes, or we can go ahead and end a little bit early. I will be sending out this recording to everybody if we had some people come in a little bit later and miss like the first half. So this will be going out.
Well, I'll again invite anyone who has an experience of celebrating independence to share their experience. Jessica, have you had any experiences that you can share with us?
I have vague memories as a child visiting family in Durango and kind of doing some celebrations. I can't remember if it was during like Independence Day, but I do remember like they have a huge festival and dressing up and just eating a lot and having a really bad stomach ache. I ate way too much for my little stomach. So, but that's my fond memory. And spending time with family I don't normally get to see. I'm from El Paso, but it's still quite a jaunt to Durango.
Great, thanks for sharing. And Kevin, what about you?
Actually, in my youth, I went overseas and actually lived in Panama, where speaking of celebrations, they have a beautiful celebration for their Independence Day, and they dress up and they have the women have these white with colorful outfits on, and they have I don't remember the exact name of the
Polleras.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Panamanian, Alicia.
Right. And, you know, I still remember from being 6 years old. I was there from 6 to 10 years old. And, you know, I can sing it in my head. Panameño, 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 vida mía, etc. But
Yo quiero que tú me lleves.
al tambor de alegría, right? And then we moved
Very
next door
catchy,
to
right?
Colombia and lived in Bogota, up 9,000 feet in the air. And then we moved to the Dominican Republic. So kind of spent 10 years of my life experiencing those 3 different countries, most of all, yeah.
Great, thank you. And I see that Brenda added the chat here that she is Puerto Riqueña, and And so Puerto Rico is, as she says, is a part of the U.S. territory, and they celebrate Cristobal Colon and the discovery of Puerto Rico, and dance salsa, which is a dance that is very popular in Puerto Rico. Oh, does Kevin can dance salsa?
Yes, well, being that I lived in Latin America for so many years, you learn salsa, merengue, cha-cha. You learn to dance it all. So merengue is a very interesting one because it comes from the time when the slaves were looking for a way to stay positive, right? And so the merengue, they say that it came from when they had their ball and chain on, and that's why they drag their foot in when you're dancing merengue. You lift your left and you drag your right, and and then you go in circles and so forth. But yeah, it's salsa, merengue, all the cumbias and so forth. Of course, Colombia and Mexico have big cumbia countries, but I'm sure it goes off into the other countries as well. Of course,
Yeah.
the tango from Argentina and the Brazil, known for its I just went blank.
Samba.
Samba. There you go.
And the cumbia is popular across the region. It's very popular in Chile as well. A lot of the dances in Latin America have a very strong African influence in not just the music, but also the movements that are involved in the dances. Even those areas that do not have very large populations of people of African descent, their music is still influenced by African traditions. Carla, I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I was just going to add too, even like the Argentine tango has some African influence to it as well. So you do get just a wide variety of influence and just sounds that come from those influences. It's really nice.
I'll also say that La Cueca is a funny dance. It's as Carla said, it's a beautiful dance, but it is quite a funny dance because it has that inspiration of the rooster and the hen courting each other. So it's one of the few dances where the partners never actually touch. And that's done on purpose. So there's always the kind of the rooster goes one way and the hen then goes one way, and then they kind of block each other, and they're kind of constantly going in a figure eight around each other, which it seems really simple, but I can tell you from having tried to dance it, it is actually quite hard.
I guess our next program is going to have to be dancing around Latin America and just kind of learning the different dance stuff. I want to say one of my fellow programmers did a program like that with some CAP artists, but I didn't get to attend. But I know they did some dance moves from different countries. So maybe I'd do a fun expanded on it.
Diversity celebration, which today is a part of, at the end of our celebration. So basically, we do this for a month and have employee resource groups be the point persons for different programs. And at the end of this, so in November, we will have something very similar about dancing from around Latin America.
Oh, great.
Maybe even around the world, I believe, actually.
November 19th, around the world. Yeah.
Okay.
Very exciting.
There was a question if you would dance worse or better under the influence of terremotos.
Terremotos. I will say from experience, I think I dance better, but I think in reality it's not true.
In the moment, it
feels like I'm dancing better.
At least in the brain we are, right?
That's right. That's right.
No one else might agree with us, but we're doing a great job.
But that's the fun of the celebration, is that everyone else is kind of on the dance floor trying it out themselves and drinking terremotos. So nobody really cares. It's all good fun.
It's a great confidence booster, at least for yourself. I'll have to try that. I don't think I've ever had that drink.
It's good.
Might look up a recipe. Maybe add that to the cookbook for the Like Abuela made.
There you go. It's a very particular white wine. I don't know if you can find it here, but I'm sure there's something similar. here in the US. I've never tried to make it up here.
Wonder if I can have my parents send it from El Paso.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, that's also interesting. You have the different drinks. You know, in Colombia, they have aguardiente. And,
Mhm.
you know, there's similarities to the indigenous, you know, from the indigenous influences too. But yeah, you have different ones. Of course, Mexico is known for several.
Mhm.
And
That's a really interesting area to do a tasting between Peruvian pisco and Chilean pisco. See which
Mhm.
one's better.
true. Then you have your rums, right? The
Mhm.
Puerto Rican rum, and then you have the Dominican rum,
Mhm.
so forth and so on. So
Yeah, definitely.
And cachaça in Brazil, which is a type of rum.
mhm. Much less if we start getting into food. Whoa. And, you know,
So I guess
it was
instead of
funny
tequila
'cause-
tasting, we should do a rum tasting.
There you go. Yeah, I'd sign up for that.
Well, I don't see any more questions, but so I'm going to go ahead and say that this is about over. I want to thank you both again, Dr. Mark and Dr. Carla. Thank you so much for coming today. Hopefully, I can work with you all again for something. I've already got some ideas that were kind of put in the chat, and so I'm going to ruminate over some things. And so, yeah, just a reminder, this is for the diversity celebration with the City of Dallas in partnership with the Dallas Public Library and sponsored by Husted. And Kevin, if I don't know if you want to let people know for city employees how they can join Husted or anything else, and I can send a follow-up email. Mark, if you'll send me that presentation, that would be great.
Sure.
And I can send that out to everyone if you would like.
Yeah, sure.
And yeah,
Yeah,
and then I'll put
anyone who
my
is interested-
links in the chat.
Anyone
Feel free.
interested in joining us, Ed, you just at dallascityhall.com, and we will get back to you with any information that you would like, including membership and what it takes to join.
Okay, and I'm putting my information in the chat for any more programming suggestions or questions that you may have. So thank you all so much for coming today. And thank you so much, Dr. Mark and Dr. Carla. I really enjoyed this so very, very much.
We did.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
coming.
you so
all.
much.
Appreciate it.
Take care.